Adam Pearson. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Bora. Thank you so much for inviting me. That was really kind of you. I appreciate it.
So, Adam, most people don't accidentally discover an extinct cacao variety. Can you take us back to that moment, which I enjoyed reading, when Dr. Meinhardt from the USDA called and said, "Are you sitting down?"
He, he,
What was going through your mind?
well, so he called my dad. So he called my dad Dan, and my dad, I remember he called me right after. I was working at the Department of Defense as a payroll accountant when we got the news, because my dad and my brother had started a different business that they exited, and then they were looking around for a new business, and chocolate was like the last thing on our mind. So I was working as a payroll accountant at the Department of Defense. My dad was actually getting ready to go out to a party, and he told me all these details when he called me. He's bald. He's got a bald head like you, and he was telling me like he was shaving his head with his electric razor, and he had it only like halfway shaved. I don't know if that ever happens to you, but he had it only like halfway shaved, and he was sitting with no socks on, looking in like his closet mirror, shaving his head when he got the call. Yeah, and the head of the USDA genetics lab, based out of Beltsville, Maryland, called my dad and told him that these cacao leaf samples, we took leaves off the trees of cacao trees in this remote canyon in the jungle of northern Peru and sent them into the USDA, and he called us back and told us that, called my dad and told him that we had rediscovered a thought to be extinct variety of cocoa bean growing in the northern Peruvian jungle, and the type of cacao that we discovered it was thought to have been wiped out by disease a century earlier, and it was the premier genetic variety of cacao that made all the really high-end chocolate throughout Europe during the 19th century, and was thought to have been wiped out by disease at the beginning of the 20th century. And so we didn't know any of that, and that's what Dr. Meinhardt from the genetics lab was explaining to my dad. And we had stumbled across this population of cacao totally, it was totally like a freak accident that we had even come
Why did you
across this.
collect the leaves in the first place?
We so we were in Peru. We originally started doing business in Peru in the year 2001. We had a contract with the world's biggest gold mine. This is going to be like a thing where you're like, well, why were you doing business with like the world's biggest gold mine? And I could take that back a really long ways depending on how far back you want me to go. But we were in the northern Peruvian mountain city of Cajamarca, Peru, which is it's like a small city in the middle of the Andes Mountains. Outside of that town, the world's biggest gold mine was located, and we had a contract with that mine to sell them hydraulic hoses and nuts and bolts to the maintenance department of that gold mine. And we did that for 4 years, and we really became sort of jaded with that business for a number of reasons, but the cafeteria at the mine had a whole separate contract, because when miners go out to work at a gold mine, because it's remote, they stay there for like 4 or 5 days at a time, and they got to have food on site. So the company who managed that cafeteria was Sodexo. I don't know if you ever heard of Sodexo, but Sodexo is this big French company that manages cafeterias. Like I'm in the Seattle
It's
area.
like Aramark, right?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly right. So they manage the Microsoft cafeterias here, and they were managing the cafeteria for this gold mine, and the local manager was looking for somebody who could buy bananas from the nearest agricultural zone, which was, so we're like in the mountains. If you go east down the Andes Mountains into the jungle, there's a big agricultural area there. But nobody in the little town we were living in wanted to go into the jungle because mountain people don't like the jungle. In Peru, mountain people don't like the jungle because it's too hot and wild for them, and so they couldn't find like a local entrepreneur who would go into the jungle and try to buy bananas. But my dad and my brother, this is part of the reason why we were even in Peru. They're like real adventurous guys. My brother in particular, and my brother met the manager of Sodexo. Was like, yeah, we'll go into the jungle. We'll go take a look at it. So we went to the jungle, and we were meeting up with like a local a local government person, and that government person wanted to push cocoa beans in the region. And so she was like, took us out to this area where there was bananas, but where there was also a lot of cacao. And the way, I don't know if you've ever heard of shade-grown coffee. You've heard that. Have you heard the expression shade-grown coffee?
Shade
All
grown.
right,
I
so
don't think I've
like,
heard shade grown.
so in the coffee industry, shade-grown coffee is supposed to be like better. And cacao, always, cocoa beans, the raw ingredient that chocolate is made out of, always grow in the shade because cacao trees in particular don't like a lot of sunlight. They grow better in the shade. And banana trees have these long, wide, drooping leaves that are shade. It's a shade tree. So if you're going to plant out a cacao orchard, you will plant bananas first because it gives a canopy that blocks the sunlight from coming. So anyways, this director of this local government agency is like, oh, you're looking for bananas, cool. But she was kind of running a trick on us. She takes us out to this zone where there's a lot of cacao and bananas. And so we're looking at we're looking at bananas, but we kept seeing cacao trees. Have you seen a cacao tree before? Maybe you saw it in the book or you saw it on our website or something, but
I mean, I'm not sure if I've seen it in real life.
okay, so they're
Where
weird.
would I have seen it? Do they have them in Puerto Rico? No.
I think they might. A lot of people see them in Costa Rica or Hawaii.
Okay, I haven't been to either places.
All right. So cacao pods are like, they look like an American football, and they got the husk has the thickness of a pumpkin or a squash, and you cut them open, and then on the inside there's seeds that are covered in a sugary slime. And then you have to ferment the seeds, and when you ferment the seeds, they end up tasting like chocolate. Anyways, we didn't know any of that. We just saw these weird fruits, and we started asking around, like, what are the bananas? Like, we know what bananas look like. Everybody knows what bananas look like. So that was all right. We knew where to buy bananas, but we saw these pods, and they were so weird looking that we said, like, what is that? And they're like, that's where chocolate comes from. We said, no, you got to be kidding. And so they started explaining the process to us, and we came across this one farmer whose name was Noé Vasquez. His name is Noé, and he ended up becoming our business partner. And he said, and this is all getting to why we got in touch with the USDA. So we meet this guy Noé Vasquez on one of our trips out to this part of the jungle, and he says, you guys, and he saw that we were interested in cacao, and he called us over one day on his farm. He's like, you guys want to see something special? We said, yeah, we do. Just like not we, but my dad and my brother. You guys want to see something like really special? I said, yeah. So he took us into this little sort of secluded orchard that he had on his farm, and he cut open a cacao pod, and then he started cutting open the seeds. And usually when you cut open a cacao seed, it's purple on the inside. And the purple is tannins. It's similar to why a wine grape is purple. And so the normal tendency of dark chocolate is to be astringent and kind of bitter, like red wine. That's its normal flavor profile. But he told us, like, there's a lot of farms out here who have an heirloom variety of cacao growing on their farm that when you cut open the seeds, they're white on the inside.
Oh.
All right? And so that's like, you get all of the chocolate flavor, but without the astringency. Now, we didn't know anything about genetics, but he just told us, like, there's white seeds around here growing. And that is the thing that got us interested, because he told us that's not normal. You don't see that everywhere. It turns out that white cacao is a genetic defect. When a population of cacao grows in isolation for like thousands or millions of years, and family members start to breed with each other, similar like albinism, or the way you get like genetic defects when human family members mate with each other, it happens with cacao trees too, except for in this case it's like a delicious genetic defect.
Wow. Because
you get the chocolate flavors without the astringency. So we called the USDA. My dad called the USDA one day. He just cold called them. And the director's secretary was out on vacation, so he ends up talking to the PhD Lyndall Meinhardt, head of the genetics testing lab, and he said, we came across like these white cacao seeds growing in northern Peru. And the guy said, that's interesting, because we've done all kinds of research in the northern part of South America, and we've never heard of any white cacao seeds growing out there. That's weird. That's something we didn't know about. And so he offered to help us do the genetic testing. And so the way you do that is you send leaf samples. You pick leaves from trees. You send leaf samples with like a descant in a vacuum sealed bag, and then they do the genetic testing on the leaves. So we gathered leaves from all around that part of the northern Peruvian jungle, and then that's when he called my dad and told him, you have discovered a thought to be extinct variety of cacao. And he said, all of the leaf samples that you sent were 98% pure, except for one tree. This one tree, which was growing on the farm of a guy named Fortunato Colala. His first name's Fortunato. His last name's Colala. We sent 10 leaf samples from his farm, and he said the fourth leaf sample out of the 10 that you sent from Fortunato's farm was a 99.99% genetic match to this type of cacao that was thought to have gone extinct. It's the most pure, it remains so to this day. It's the most pure expression ever tested of this particular cacao variety, which is called Nacional Cacao, that was thought to have been gone extinct. So my dad, he says when he got the news, he just like put his hand in his head, and he said, all right, well, I guess we're going to start a chocolate business. Because we weren't in the chocolate business. We weren't even in the chocolate business at that point. We just got the results back. It's like, all right, we're going to start a chocolate business. So that's, and then he called me. I was working at the Department of Defense, sitting in a cubicle. And he called me and he said, Adam, we're starting a chocolate business. I said, that's awesome, Dad, let's do it. And then I hung up the phone, and then I looked around. I'm like, oh, I still work for the Department of Defense. Dang it. And it was like 2 years until I was able to quit my job and start working for the business.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was going to ask you about that 2 years that, it took 2 years before you even tasted chocolate from your cacao. But I'd like to hear a little bit about that. I guess first, your brother said he wanted to move to the jungle.
Yeah, he didn't really want to move, but we kind of felt that somebody had to. So, I'm sorry, did I cut in on your question? My apologies.
No, I just wanted you to kind of tell us that story.
So, after doing the mining business, so I used to just, my dad built and owned a hotel in downtown San Diego in the 80s. And he was one of the first people to do a real estate development project in downtown San Diego in the 80s. Before that, it was like a slum, Skid Row. So my dad built this hotel that he opened in 1986, and he ran it for 15 years, and then it was illegally stolen from him by one of his investors. And so my dad declared bankruptcy when he was, how old was he? I think he was 55 when he declared bankruptcy, and he was in bankruptcy for 7 years, and that was during my teenage years. So I lived with a man who was owned a hotel that was worth $50 million one day, and then was bankrupt the next day, and went through a depression. So I saw my dad go through that. And so the mining business that he and my brother started, they started it when he was 62, and they built that up from scratch, and they did end up making money. So over 4 years, they made some money. And so by the time they exited that, my dad was like 66, 67, and all the money he had in the world as a 67-year-old man was this money that he had made in 4 years from this mining business. And then he said, when we're going to start the chocolate business, he said, I'm just going to spend all of this starting this chocolate business. So it was a pretty courageous thing by my dad. But what we learned was that we were going to need somebody. There's a couple things. We wanted to make sure we were only buying this one genetic variety of cacao, which has distinctive features. It has yellow pods, and it's bumpy on the outside. So we needed to have a presence to make sure that we only bought this one variety of cacao. And then also to make fine chocolate, the post-harvest processing of cacao, similar to fermenting grapes or fermenting other alcohols, the post-harvest processing of cacao is very important, and it has to be done meticulously if we're going to make a really good chocolate. And we didn't know how to do any of that, but we knew that we had to do it. And my brother, of the three of us, between me and my dad and my brother, is an engineering type. He knows how to build operations, and he knows how to do trial and error and keep chipping away on processes until it becomes perfect. So one of us was going to have to go live in the jungle. My dad was 67, so he's I can send a 68-year-old man out to live in the jungle. But besides, he's more of a sort of a swashbuckling, fearless entrepreneurial type. And I was working as an accountant, man. I do the marketing now, but I was an accountant. I wasn't fit to move out to the jungle. So, and my brother's an adventurous engineering type. So he moved out to the jungle. We spent my dad's life saving building a cacao processing facility in a abandoned rice mill. Out in the northern Peruvian jungle, there's all these abandoned rice mills, because in the 60s there was this movement to help rice farmers mill their own rice so that they would get a value add. Anyways, they overbuilt. So there's these abandoned rice mills. So we rented a rice mill, which had this huge rice husk mountain behind it that was like, the rice husk mountain was like 50 feet tall and 200 feet. It was a mountain. It was like pushing in one of the back walls. So we had to refurbish this rice mill and rebuild it. And then my brother set up shop, and we started buying cacao and testing lot after lot after lot of cacao. And then after like a year of buying cacao, my brother took the cocoa beans to this flavor testing lab in one of the big cities, and they told us, yeah, this cacao sucks. So we've been doing that for like a year, and then my brother had to rebuild the processes, and then after 2 years, we took the cacao back, and the whole time we're spending my dad's life savings. I was still working at the Department of Defense, and then we took it back, and the guys go, all right, now it's great. So it took us 2 years.
Why did it suck after the first year? What was wrong?
What we ended up figuring out about fermenting cacao, so the process of fermenting cacao generates a lot of vinegar and alcohol. And if you taste a dark chocolate that like doesn't have a lot of ingredients, it's just minimal ingredients like cacao and organic cane sugar, and it's a dark chocolate, you'll notice that a lot of those chocolate bars tend towards acidity. They tend towards sourness and acidity. And that's because in the process of fermenting cacao, you create vinegar and alcohol. And then after you ferment cacao, the next step is to take the cocoa beans and lay them out on dryer beds so that they dry under the sun. And when they dry under the sun, there's a membrane around cacao that dries into a shell. And if you take the cocoa beans directly from the fermentation process and put them right out on the dryer beds, a lot of vinegar and alcohol gets trapped inside the shell. And then it's just stuck in your ingredient it's just stuck inside the cocoa bean there forevermore. So my brother started talking to industry people, and what we learned was after you take the cocoa beans out of the fermentation boxes, you ferment cacao in these wooden boxes. You should let them rest for a day in a cool, dark room. You just let them sit there for a day, and the vinegar and the alcohol kind of gases out. It comes out and it dissipates, so that when you put the cocoa beans under the sun to dry and the shell forms, the vinegar has sort of gassed out. But we didn't know that. So that was like a critical step we had to learn. And there's a lot of others, there's little more minor details, but that was the key thing that was messing us up. So once we learned about what we call a pre-dry, we call it the pre-dry step, where you just let cacao rest after fermentation, then that makes all the difference in the world. So that was the key step we had to learn through trial and error and just like trying to figure it out. So once we learned that, we were off to the races.
Yeah. So this story is really interesting, especially from the perspective of somebody not knowing anything about any industry, just stumbling upon an opportunity by luck. Now having to learn a very complex. Everything you explained to me, a lot of it in one ear, out the other. To frankly speaking,
I
very
understand.
Complicated. So that's intimidating. Like I'm thinking about this as a potential entrepreneur. What if this happened to me? What if I had come across an opportunity like this, found this extinct cacao? Would I have pursued this? Right?